No one in the kingdom of Everwin opened their door during a mountain storm. The old law was older than any king, and every child knew it by heart. If a wolf appeared on your doorstep while thunder shook the mountains, you left the door barred, the fire low, and your prayers whispered. Those who ignored the warning were said to disappear before the next sunrise, leaving behind nothing but empty footprints swallowed by snow. But on the coldest night of the longest winter, one young woman did the unthinkable. She lifted an exhausted silver wolf from the frozen ground and carried it into her tiny cabin, wrapping it in blankets while the storm howled outside. She had no idea that hidden beneath its rain-soaked fur were ancient golden markings that belonged to the lost Alpha King himself. And when dawn finally broke over the Frostpine Mountains, every wolf from the northern forest stood silently outside her door, not to attack, not to hunt, but to bow their heads before the woman who had unknowingly changed the fate of 2 kingdoms forever. The Frostpine Mountains had a way of making people feel small. Their snow-covered peaks pierced the clouds as though they held up the sky itself. Ancient forests stretched for endless miles across their slopes, where towering pines whispered secrets whenever the wind wandered through their branches. Crystal rivers cut through frozen valleys before disappearing beneath blankets of snow, and old stone paths, built by hands long forgotten, twisted between cliffs where few travelers dared to walk after sunset. The people of Everwin respected those mountains. They hunted at their edges. They gathered herbs from their lower forests. But they never stayed after dark. Too many stories had been born beneath those towering pines. Stories of glowing eyes watching from the trees. Stories of wolves that never aged. Stories of an unseen king who ruled the northern wilderness, protecting an ancient promise that no one alive could fully remember. Most dismissed those tales as fireside legends. Even so, when winter storms rolled over the mountains, every door in every village was locked before nightfall. No one argued with old fear. No one except Elara. Her cabin rested farther north than anyone thought wise, tucked into a quiet clearing where wildflowers painted the grass every spring and snow buried the earth each winter. It was small, built by her father years before she was born, with rough cedar walls darkened by countless seasons and a stone chimney that never seemed to stop smoking. To strangers, it looked lonely. To Elara, it was the only place that had ever truly felt like home. Every morning began the same way. Before sunrise, she stirred glowing embers back into dancing flames. A small iron kettle soon hummed over the fire while the comforting scent of pinewood smoke mixed with mint leaves hanging from the ceiling beams. She never rushed. The mountains had taught her that everything important happened slowly. She wrapped herself in a thick wool cloak stitched countless times by careful hands. Every patch told a story. One had been sewn after she caught it on a thorn bush gathering herbs. Another came after helping pull an old farmer's cart from deep spring mud. Nothing she owned was expensive. Everything she owned had earned its place. Outside, the world still slept beneath fresh snow. Her boots pressed softly into the white blanket covering the clearing. The cold kissed her cheeks until they turned pink, but she smiled anyway. Winter had never frightened her. She had learned long ago that even the hardest season carried quiet beauty for those willing to notice it. Tiny rabbit tracks crossed the garden. A pair of bluebirds flitted between snow-covered branches despite the cold. Somewhere beyond the trees, a brook continued its endless song beneath a thin layer of ice. Life never truly disappeared. It simply learned how to wait. Her basket rested comfortably against her arm as she followed familiar paths through the forest. Every tree felt like an old friend. She knew where the winter moss grew thickest against northern stones. She knew which cliffs sheltered rare healing flowers even after the first snowfall. She knew where injured deer often hid when hunters ventured too deep into the mountains. Many villagers called her strange. Some called her foolish. They said she cared more about wounded creatures than she did about herself. Perhaps they were right. Years earlier, after sickness claimed both her parents during one merciless winter, bitterness had tried to settle inside her heart. Instead, kindness had quietly taken its place. She remembered the days after their passing. Neighbors had helped for a while. Food appeared on her doorstep. Firewood arrived without explanation. But kindness faded as people's own lives demanded attention. Soon she stood alone. A frightened girl inside an empty cabin. She could have surrendered to loneliness. Instead, She promised herself something simple. If she ever found another living soul abandoned by the world, she would never let them face that loneliness alone. She had kept that promise ever since. An injured fox once spent nearly a month sleeping beside her fireplace before returning to the forest. A broken-winged hawk recovered inside a wooden shelter she built behind the cabin. Even travelers caught by unexpected storms found warm soup waiting whenever they reached her door. She never expected payment. Seeing relief soften exhausted faces was enough. The villagers appreciated her medicines but never truly understood her. At the weekly market in Ashbrook Village, people greeted her politely before lowering their voices once she walked away. Too soft. One day kindness will kill that girl. Nobody survives these mountains by trusting everything with a heartbeat. Elara heard the whispers. She simply smiled. People often feared what they did not understand. Compassion required no audience, only action. By late afternoon, dark clouds began gathering above the Frostpine peaks. At first they appeared harmless, just another winter front moving across the mountains. Then the wind changed. Birdsong vanished. The forest became unnaturally still. Even the pine branches stopped swaying. Elara paused beside a fallen log, lifting her eyes toward the sky. The silence felt wrong, heavy, as though the mountains themselves were holding their breath. A distant rumble rolled across the peaks. Not thunder. Not exactly. Something deeper. Something older. The village bell echoed faintly from miles away. One long toll. Then another. Storm warning. She gathered her basket and hurried home. Snowflakes began falling before she reached the clearing. Within minutes they thickened into blinding sheets. The wind roared through the trees, bending branches until they groaned under impossible weight. Darkness swallowed the afternoon long before sunset. Inside the cabin, Elara secured the shutters and fed more logs into the fireplace. Flames climbed higher, casting warm golden light across the wooden walls. Outside, the storm became furious. Rain turned to sleet. Sleet became heavy snow. Thunder cracked so violently the windows trembled inside their frames. The old stories returned to her mind. Never open the door. Not during a mountain storm. No matter what you hear. She tried to ignore them. She brewed hot tea. Sorted dried herbs. Mended a worn blanket beneath the firelight. But something kept pulling her attention toward the window. The storm felt different. Almost alive. Hours passed. Night settled completely. The wind screamed through the forest like unseen voices racing between the trees. Then, a sound. Soft. Barely louder than the storm itself. A single scrape against the porch. Elara looked up. Silence followed. She waited. Perhaps it had only been a branch. Then came another sound. A weak thud. As though something heavy had collapsed just outside her door. Her hands froze around the teacup. The fire crackled quietly behind her. Another thunderclap shook the cabin. She remembered every warning she had ever heard. Do not answer. Do not look. Do not invite the mountain's curse inside. She remained still. The sound did not come again. Minutes stretched endlessly. Finally, unable to ignore the feeling pressing against her heart, she reached for the lantern hanging beside the fireplace. Its warm light flickered across the room as she approached the wooden door. The latch felt cold beneath trembling fingers. She hesitated. The storm howled outside. Every instinct whispered for her to turn back. Instead, she slowly lifted the bar. The old hinges groaned as the door opened just enough for icy wind to burst inside. Snow swirled through the narrow opening. Lantern light spilled across the porch. At first, she saw nothing. Then the drifting snow shifted. A large silver wolf lay collapsed against the steps, its thick fur soaked by freezing rain and stained with dark patches of blood. One powerful foreleg was twisted beneath its body, and each shallow breath escaped in small clouds that vanished almost instantly into the storm. Its golden eyes opened just enough to meet hers. There was no growl. No bared teeth. Only exhaustion. And something she recognized all too well. The quiet, desperate look of someone who had reached the end of their strength and no longer expected anyone to help. Elara forgot every warning the mountains had ever whispered. She set down the lantern, stepped into the raging storm, and knelt beside the great wolf. Behind the endless curtain of snow, unseen eyes were already watching. The storm did not loosen its grip on the mountains for the rest of the night. Wind battered the cabin until every timber groaned beneath the strain. Snow piled against the walls so deeply that the windows disappeared beneath white drifts. Branches snapped somewhere beyond the clearing, swallowed almost instantly by the roar of the blizzard. Inside, however, warmth fought stubbornly against the winter. The fire crackled brightly inside the stone hearth, filling the small cabin with dancing amber light. Shadows stretched across the wooden floor as flames rose and settled again, painting every corner with a quiet sense of safety. Elara knelt beside the wolf. His silver coat was soaked from head to tail, heavy with melting snow and icy rain. Beneath the thick fur she could feel powerful muscles, though they trembled with exhaustion rather than strength. "You've come a long way," she whispered softly, more to comfort herself than the animal before her. The wolf did not move. Only his chest rose and fell in slow, painful breaths. She hurried to fetch dry blankets from a cedar chest beside her bed. One after another, she laid them across the great animal, carefully rubbing warmth back into his frozen body. His fur was unlike anything she had ever touched. Most wolves carried shades of grey or charcoal black. His coat shimmered like fresh snow beneath moonlight. As she brushed melting ice away from his shoulders, her fingers suddenly stopped. Hidden beneath the soaked fur, something glimmered. She leaned closer. Golden markings. They curved across his shoulder like delicate vines, disappearing beneath the silver coat before reappearing near his neck. She frowned. "I've never seen anything like that." The marks did not look painted, nor did they resemble scars. They seemed to glow from beneath the skin itself, pulsing faintly whenever firelight danced across them. For a brief moment, she wondered whether fever had clouded her eyes. She blinked. The glow faded. Only damp silver fur remained. Perhaps she had imagined it. Outside, thunder rolled once more across the mountains. The wolf stirred. A low breath escaped him. His ears twitched. Slowly, his golden eyes opened. Not fully, just enough to find her. Elara remained perfectly still. She expected fear. She expected the wild instinct every creature carried. Instead, the great wolf simply watched her. His gaze was steady, calm, strangely thoughtful. It did not feel like looking into the eyes of an animal. It felt as though someone was quietly studying her heart. Without thinking, she reached toward him. Her hand stopped inches from his muzzle. The wolf could have bitten, could have lunged, could have ended her life before she managed another breath. Instead, he lowered his head, just enough for her trembling fingers to rest gently against the thick fur between his ears. Warm, soft, alive. A long breath escaped him. Not a growl. Not even a sigh. Almost. Relief. The corners of Elara's lips softened into a smile. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." The words drifted into the quiet cabin like a promise. The wolf slowly closed his eyes. Sleep claimed him almost immediately. Long after midnight, the storm continued its endless assault. Elara remained awake. She cleaned the wound along the wolf's foreleg with warm water mixed with crushed mountain herbs. The cut was deep, as though something sharp had torn through muscle before he escaped. Not claws. Not another wolf. Steel. Someone had hunted him. She wrapped the injury with fresh linen before adding another log to the fire. The cabin grew warmer. Outside, winter raged without mercy. She glanced once more toward her unexpected guest. Even asleep, he looked magnificent. His paws were enormous. Old scars crossed his shoulders beneath layers of silver fur, each one telling stories no ordinary hunter could have survived. Yet his face remained peaceful, almost noble. She found herself wondering where he had come from, who had chased him, and why. The questions drifted through her thoughts until exhaustion finally pulled her toward sleep. She rested in the old rocking chair beside the fireplace. The firelight flickered gently across the room. The wolf slept beside her. Beyond the cabin walls, dark shapes moved silently between the trees. Kayla dreamed. Not the restless dreams of an ordinary wolf. The memories of a king. He saw towering stone halls hidden deep within the northern mountains. Massive pillars carved with wolves reaching toward the stars. Silver banners dancing beneath ancient fires. Voices calling him, "My king." He saw battle. Snow-stained crimson. Brothers falling beside him. The curse. The betrayal. The ancient crown breaking apart beneath black steel. Then, another memory. A cabin. A warm fire. Gentle hands wrapping a blanket around his wounded body. No fear. No hatred. No greed. Only kindness. For the first time in many years. The crushing weight inside his heart eased. The ancient curse sleeping beneath his skin responded. The golden markings beneath his fur glowed faintly once again. Far beyond the cabin, every wolf in the northern forest lifted its head. They had felt it. Their king lived. Hours later, the storm ended. Not slowly. Suddenly, the wind disappeared. Snow settled peacefully upon the earth. Clouds drifted apart. The moon shone through for only a few quiet moments before slipping beneath the western horizon. Silence covered the mountains. A silence so complete that Elara woke immediately. She blinked. The fire had burned low. Soft morning light seeped through the edges of the shutters. She smiled faintly. The storm's over. She stood carefully, stretching sore muscles before looking toward the blankets beside the fireplace. The wolf was awake. He was already sitting upright. Though weakened, he looked far stronger than he had the night before. Golden eyes followed every movement she made. "You're feeling better." He blinked once. Almost as though he understood. She filled a wooden bowl with fresh water and gently placed it before him. The great wolf drank slowly. Not desperately. With remarkable patience. His manners amused her. "I've met travelers with less grace than you." A tiny smile crossed her face. For one impossible moment. She could have sworn the wolf looked amused as well. Then, something changed. His ears lifted. His eyes shifted toward the door. Every muscle in his body became perfectly still. Not frightened. Alert. Listening. Elara noticed it immediately. "What is it?" The wolf rose carefully onto all four legs. Despite the injury, he stood tall. Majestic. He stared toward the cabin door without moving. Then came a sound. Soft. Crunch. 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 Footsteps. Not one pair. Many. Dozens. Perhaps. Hundreds. The sound surrounded the cabin. Elara's smile disappeared. Her heartbeat quickened. The footsteps stopped. Silence returned. She looked toward the wolf. He remained calm. Almost expectant. Slowly, she approached the window. A thin layer of frost covered the glass. She wiped it away with her sleeve. The breath caught in her throat. Outside, a wolf stood beside the garden fence. Then another. Then 5 more. She hurried to the opposite window. More wolves. Every direction she looked. Wolves. Large grey wolves. Black wolves. White wolves. Old wolves carrying battle scars. Young wolves standing proudly beside them. They filled the clearing. They lined the edge of the forest. They stood upon nearby hills. Hundreds of silent figures surrounded the little cabin. Not one growled. Not one bared its teeth. Every head remained lowered. Every golden eye faced the cabin. As though waiting. As though honoring something hidden within its walls. Elara's knees weakened. Her hand slipped from the window frame. "What?" She whispered the word into the stunned silence. Behind her, the silver wolf stepped quietly toward the door. Outside, the largest black wolf in the clearing slowly lowered itself onto the snow. One by one, every other wolf followed. Hundreds of wolves bowed together before the little cabin beneath the Frostpine Mountains. And from the distant ridge beyond the trees, terrified villagers had just witnessed the impossible. The first scream came from the ridge above the valley. It cut through the still morning air so sharply that flocks of snow finches burst from the pine trees in a cloud of white wings. A shepherd had been leading his flock toward the lower pastures when he saw them. Not one wolf. Not 10. Hundreds. An ocean of grey, black, and silver coats surrounded the lonely cabin beneath the mountains. They stood without moving, their thick fur stirring gently in the cold breeze. None fought for territory. None snapped at one another. Every wolf faced the same direction. Every wolf watched Elara's home. The shepherd dropped his crook and ran. By the time the church bell rang in Ashbrook village, the story had already spread farther than the smoke rising from the chimneys. The wolves have surrounded the herbalist's cabin. They're preparing to attack. She must have cursed them. No, they've come for her. Fear always traveled faster than truth. Within an hour, nearly the entire village had gathered along the snowy ridge overlooking the clearing. No one dared walk closer. Children hid behind their parents. Old men gripped hunting spears with trembling hands. Women whispered hurried prayers beneath their breath. Never in living memory had anyone seen so many wolves gathered in one place. The oldest villager among them, a grey-haired woman named Myra, slowly lowered herself onto a weathered stump, her wrinkled hands tightening around the carved walking staff she had carried for decades. Her cloudy eyes never left the clearing. "I've seen this once before," she murmured. Several villagers turned toward her. "When I was only a little girl." No one interrupted. "My grandmother told me that when every wolf bows together." Her voice became barely louder than the wind. "They bow only before their king." Silence spread through the crowd. Then someone laughed nervously. "Kings don't live in forests." Another shook his head. "The old stories aren't real." But no one sounded convinced. Because below them, the impossible continued. The wolves did not move. They simply waited. Inside the cabin, Elara remained frozen beside the window. Her breathing had become slow and uneven. She had helped injured animals before. Foxes, owls, even wolves. But nothing could explain what stood outside. Hundreds of wild creatures. Perfectly silent. Perfectly disciplined. Waiting. The silver wolf remained standing near the door. His posture had changed. The weakness she had seen the night before was gone. His head stood higher. His shoulders appeared broader. His golden eyes carried quiet authority. For a heartbeat, he looked less like an exhausted survivor, and more like a ruler returning to his throne. Elara slowly approached him. "You know them." The wolf turned toward her. His gaze softened. He lowered his head slightly, almost apologetically. She reached out once again, resting her hand against the thick fur along his neck. "I don't understand." The wolf closed his eyes briefly beneath her touch. Neither did he wish she had to. If she knew who he truly was, everything would change. Hidden beneath the silver fur, Kayla's thoughts raced. For years he had wandered alone beneath the curse. A king stripped of his throne. A guardian unable to protect those who still believed in him. The ancient spell had been merciless. Only one act could weaken it. A kindness freely given. No reward expected. No title recognized. No hidden ambition. Thousands had hunted him. Some hoped to claim the legendary Alpha's power. Others wished only to display his head upon castle walls. Many had pretended to help. Every false smile strengthened the curse. Every selfish act chained him deeper to his wolf form. Then came Elara. She had not asked his name. She had not searched for treasure. She had not looked for glory. She had simply seen someone suffering. And opened her door. The ancient magic sleeping inside him had awakened the moment she chose compassion over fear. His people had felt it. That was why they had come. Not because he had called. Because hope itself had. Far beyond the valley, another group climbed steadily toward the mountains. Unlike the peaceful wolves, these travelers left sharp scars across the snow. Heavy boots. Steel armor. Horse hooves. Their banners snapped violently in the cold wind. A black hawk spread across crimson cloth. The royal hunters. At their front rode Lord Varek. Even beneath layers of polished armor, he seemed carved from stone. His sharp jaw never softened. His grey eyes held neither warmth nor mercy. A long scar crossed the bridge of his nose, disappearing beneath dark hair touched with frost. Few men inspired fear simply by entering a room. Lord Varric did. He believed kindness weakened kingdoms. Compassion created rebellion. Mercy delayed justice. Power belonged only to those willing to seize it. For nearly 15 years he had searched the northern forests. Not for treasure. Not for glory. For one creature. The alpha wolf. Legends claimed its blood carried ancient magic older than kings themselves. Enough power to reshape kingdoms. Enough power to make one man impossible to overthrow. Most believed the alpha existed only in stories. Varric never doubted. He had seen the evidence. Broken chains no blacksmith could forge. Ancient ruins guarded by wolves that attacked no innocent traveler. Tracks that vanished beneath untouched snow. Every clue pointed north. Every year brought him closer. Then, just before sunrise, one of his scouts had arrived breathless at his camp. "My lord." The young soldier struggled to steady himself. "The wolves." Varric narrowed his eyes. "What about them?" "They've gathered." "Where?" "A single cabin beneath Frostpine Ridge." For the first time in many years. Lord Varric smiled. Coldly. "Prepare the men." The cabin remained surrounded. Still the wolves did not move. Elara finally gathered enough courage to step outside. The door opened slowly. Cold morning air brushed against her face. Every wolf watched. Her heartbeat echoed loudly in her ears. One careful step. Then another. Snow crunched beneath her boots. She expected growls. Bared teeth. The sudden rush of predators. Instead, the nearest wolf lowered its head even farther. Another stepped aside to clear her path. A small white wolf approached carefully before stopping just beyond arm's reach. Its tail remained still. Its ears relaxed. It gently placed something upon the snow. A single white flower. One that bloomed only during the first days of spring. Impossible. Winter still ruled the mountains. Elara stared in disbelief. The little wolf backed away. Another approached. It carried fresh mountain herbs. Another left polished river stones. An old grey wolf placed a smooth antler at her feet before quietly returning to the others. Gift after gift appeared. Not offerings demanded by fear. Tokens freely given. The villagers watching from the ridge gasped. Even Myra covered her mouth. "They're honoring her." No one answered. Because no one could explain what they were seeing. Suddenly, the peaceful silence shattered. A hunting horn echoed across the valley. Once, twice, 3 times. The wolves reacted instantly. Heads lifted. Ears flattened. Low growls rolled through the clearing like distant thunder. Birds exploded from the forest canopy. Elara turned toward the mountain road. Dark figures emerged between the trees. Rows of armored soldiers. Mounted archers. Long spears catching the pale winter sunlight. At their center, a rider dressed in crimson and black. Lord Varric. His horse stopped at the edge of the clearing. He looked slowly across the hundreds of wolves. No surprise crossed his face. Only satisfaction. "So?" His voice carried clearly through the frozen valley. The stories were true after all. His gaze shifted. Past the wolves. Past the cabin. Until it settled on Elara. The smile that formed beneath his scar carried no kindness. "You." He pointed one steel-gloved finger toward her. "Step away from the beast." Behind Elara, the silver wolf quietly moved to her side. His golden eyes never left the man who had hunted him for so many years. And for the first time since sunrise, the Alpha King bared his teeth. The growl that rolled from the silver wolf's chest was deep enough to make the frozen earth seem to tremble. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The sound carried across the clearing like the distant rumble of an avalanche, ancient and commanding. Every wolf surrounding the cabin lifted its head at once, ears forward, bodies suddenly tense. The peaceful gathering that had filled the valley only moments before became something entirely different. An army. Not of soldiers. Of guardians. Lord Varric slowly guided his black stallion a few steps forward, the animal snorting clouds of white breath into the bitter air. Behind him, Nearly 50 armored hunters spread into formation with practiced precision. Spears lowered. Bows were unstrung and quickly fitted with arrows tipped in dark iron. The winter sunlight glinted along polished steel. No one spoke. The silence itself felt sharp. Elara stood in front of her cabin, unable to move. One hand still clutched the white flower the young wolf had left at her feet only moments earlier. Its delicate petals looked strangely bright against the endless snow. She looked from the soldiers to the wolves, then back again. Neither side blinked. Neither side moved. The mountains themselves seemed to be waiting. Lord Varric's eyes narrowed. "So this is where you've been hiding?" His voice carried easily through the valley. "I've searched these forests for 15 years. The silver wolf answered only by stepping closer to Elara. His injured leg still favored the snow slightly, yet every movement carried quiet strength. Varric noticed. "So?" A cold smile touched his lips. "You're wounded." One of the younger soldiers leaned toward his commander. "My lord, there are too many." Varric never looked away from the clearing. "There are never too many." His gloved hand rested calmly on the hilt of his sword. "There are only those willing to fight, and those too afraid to." The young soldier swallowed and fell silent. Elara slowly lifted both hands. "Please." Her voice trembled in the cold air. "No one has to be hurt." Several hunters laughed quietly. Varric did not. His eyes remained fixed upon the silver wolf. "You've been deceived." Elara frowned. "I found him dying." "You found a monster." "He never harmed me." "Not yet." She shook her head. "You're wrong." For the first time, anger flashed across Lord Varric's face. "You think kindness changes nature?" His voice hardened. "A wolf remains a wolf." Elara looked down at the great silver animal beside her. His breathing remained calm. His gaze never left the hunters. If he had wished, he could already have attacked. Instead, he remained still. Waiting. Trusting. She slowly rested one hand against his shoulder. "He had every chance to kill me." Her voice became steadier. "He chose not to." Varric's expression darkened. "No," he answered quietly. "He chose patience." The air seemed colder than before. Snow drifted gently between the two sides. A raven landed high upon a pine branch overlooking the clearing. Even the birds refused to make a sound. Then, a hunter stepped forward. Perhaps he was nervous. Perhaps he simply wished to impress his commander. Without waiting for an order, he leveled his spear toward the silver wolf. "I can end this now." He took another step. The nearest wolf growled. Another answered. Then another. The sound spread through the valley like distant thunder rolling from mountain to mountain. Still, none attacked. Lord Varric watched carefully. Interesting. Remarkably disciplined. Far beyond ordinary wolves. His suspicion hardened into certainty. At last, he had found what he had spent half his life hunting. The alpha. Inside the silver wolf, memories stirred. Not memories of fear. Of duty. He remembered standing before thousands beneath towering stone pillars carved with wolves and stars. He remembered taking an oath older than kingdoms. To protect. Never conquer. To unite. Never rule through fear. That oath had survived even the curse. Which was why he refused to attack first. Too much blood had already been spilled because of hatred. He would not begin another war. Not while another path remained. Lord Varric slowly removed his helmet. Cold wind swept through his dark hair. "Listen carefully." His voice echoed across the clearing. "That creature is no ordinary wolf." Several villagers exchanged frightened glances. "I know what it is." He pointed directly toward the silver wolf. "It is the last alpha." Whispers spread immediately. The alpha. It exists. The old stories. Varric continued. For centuries these beasts have hidden ancient power from mankind. He looked toward Elara. "And now you've given it shelter." She stared back in confusion. "I didn't know." "No." His smile returned. But ignorance does not erase treason. Several villagers gasped. One elderly man lowered his eyes. Treason. Elara stepped forward. I've done nothing except help someone who was dying. You helped the kingdom's oldest enemy. I helped someone in pain. His voice rose. You chose a beast over your own people. Her answer came almost before he finished speaking. I chose compassion. The valley fell silent once again. Even the wind seemed to pause. Those two words lingered in the frozen air longer than any threat could have. Myra, the oldest woman in Ashbrook, quietly stepped away from the frightened villagers. She had watched Elara grow from a lonely little girl into the kind young woman standing before them now. Never once had she seen cruelty in her. Never once had she seen selfishness. She raised her voice. She speaks the truth. Dozens of heads turned. That girl has healed our children. She pointed toward Elara. When sickness came, she stayed. Another step. When wolves attacked livestock, she helped the injured. Another. When old Thomas nearly froze crossing the river. Her tired eyes filled with quiet emotion. She carried him home herself. Several villagers lowered their heads. They remembered. Lord Varric looked at her without expression. Return to the others. I will not. His patience finally began to crack. Old woman. Compassion is not treason. The words echoed through the clearing. For a brief moment. Even some soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Varric lifted one hand. Archers immediately drew their bows. Strings tightened. Arrowheads glimmered beneath the pale winter sun. Elara's breath caught. No. She stepped forward instinctively. The silver wolf moved with her. Instantly. Every wolf surrounding the clearing rose together. Hundreds of paws pressed into fresh snow. Hundreds of bodies stood shoulder to shoulder. Still. Not one charged. Instead, they slowly walked forward until they formed a living wall between the hunters and the cabin. Grey beside black. White beside silver. Old wolves beside young. Each standing so close that no gap remained. The line stretched across the entire clearing. Perfectly straight. Perfectly silent. A wall no king had ever built. A wall made entirely of loyalty. The soldiers hesitated. Several horses backed away nervously. One hunter whispered, "They're protecting her." Another answered, "No." His voice shook. "They're protecting him." Lord Varric studied the formation. Not one wolf had broken rank. Not one had acted from fear. They moved as one. Like soldiers who had trained together for generations. His heartbeat quickened. The legends had underestimated them. The silver wolf slowly stepped through the line. The other wolves lowered their heads as he passed. Respect. Not obedience born of fear. Respect freely given. Elara noticed it. She looked from one wolf to another. Every eye followed the silver wolf. Every movement acknowledged him. The realization slowly settled inside her. Who are you? The great wolf stopped only a few steps ahead of her. He looked back. Their eyes met. For just a heartbeat. She felt as though she stood before someone carrying centuries of sorrow behind calm golden eyes. Someone who had forgotten what it meant to trust. Until one winter night. Lord Varric finally spoke again. His voice had become quieter. More dangerous. Now I know. He slowly replaced his helmet. You are exactly where destiny said you would be. He looked toward his soldiers. Fall back. The command stunned everyone. Even his own men hesitated. My lord. We leave. No one understood. Least of all Elara. Had he surrendered? No. As the hunters slowly turned their horses, Varric allowed himself one final glance toward the cabin. A smile colder than winter touched his lips. Enjoy your victory while it lasts. His horse turned toward the mountain road. You've saved the Alpha once. His eyes settled on Elara. You won't save him again. Without another word, the hunters disappeared into the forest. The wolves remained motionless until the last sound of hoofbeats faded into the mountains. Only then did the silver wolf release a long, weary breath. But hidden beneath Lord Varric's cloak, no one had noticed the small silver pendant lying in the snow near the cabin steps. It had slipped unnoticed during the confrontation. And before the sun set, that forgotten pendant would reveal a secret capable of changing the fate of 2 kingdoms forever. For a long time after the last echo of hoofbeats disappeared into the mountains, no one moved. The wolves remained standing like silent statues scattered across the white valley. The villagers watched from the distant ridge, uncertain whether the danger had truly passed or whether something even greater waited beneath the quiet. Only the wind dared to move. It swept gently through the towering pines, carrying loose snow from the branches until tiny crystals shimmered through the morning sunlight like drifting stars. Elara slowly let out the breath she had been holding. Her heart still pounded against her ribs. She had expected blood. Instead, she had witnessed restraint. The wolves had not attacked. The hunters had not released a single arrow. Somehow, peace had survived. But only barely. She looked toward the silver wolf. The proud strength he had shown moments earlier was beginning to fade. His breathing grew heavier. His injured foreleg trembled beneath his weight. The effort of standing before the hunters had drained what little strength he had regained. Without hesitation, Elara hurried to his side. "You've done enough." Her voice was soft, almost motherly. She rested one hand beneath his neck. "Come." The great wolf looked at her for a moment before allowing himself to lean slightly against her shoulder. He was enormous. Far heavier than any ordinary wolf. Yet somehow she managed to guide him back toward the cabin one slow step at a time. As he crossed the doorway, every wolf outside lowered its head once again. The gesture sent another ripple of whispers through the villagers watching from afar. "They're bowing." "No." "They're protecting someone." "They're waiting." No one understood. Not yet. Inside the cabin, warmth wrapped around them once more. Elara added fresh logs to the fireplace until bright flames climbed the chimney. The comforting smell of cedar and burning pine filled the little room. She carefully removed the old bandage from the wolf's foreleg. The cloth was stained dark with dried blood. The wound had closed slightly during the night, but it was far from healed. She washed it gently with warm water mixed with crushed winter herbs. The silver wolf remained perfectly still. Not once did he pull away. Not once did he growl. Only his ears twitched now and then whenever the sting reached deeper than expected. "You hide pain well," Elara whispered. "If I didn't know better." She smiled faintly. "I'd think you were trying not to worry me." The wolf lifted his eyes toward her. For the briefest moment, the corners of those ancient golden eyes softened. Outside, the gathering slowly began to change. One by one, smaller wolves quietly disappeared into the forest. They did not leave in fear. They left with purpose. Scouts returned to hidden trails. Hunters slipped silently between snow-covered pines. Old guardians climbed rocky ridges overlooking the valley. Only the largest wolves remained near the cabin. They formed a loose circle beyond the tree line, unseen by most human eyes. Watching. Waiting. Protecting. Far above them, a white eagle circled once before gliding toward the northern peaks. The mountain itself seemed alive with silent messengers. News was traveling. The Alpha had been found. By midday, the frightened villagers finally gathered enough courage to descend into the clearing. They came carefully. Slowly. Keeping close together. No one carried weapons openly anymore. Fear had become something quieter. Something uncertain. Myra walked at their front. The old woman's boots pressed deeply into the fresh snow as she approached Elara's cabin. She stopped several steps from the door. "Elara." The young herbalist stepped outside. Relief spread across Myra's weathered face. "My child." She reached out and gently held Elara's hands. "They said terrible things." "I know. They said you'd summoned the wolves." "I didn't. I told them." Myra smiled sadly. "They're beginning to believe me." Behind her, several villagers lowered their eyes in shame. A blacksmith stepped forward. "I judged you unfairly." Another offered a small sack of flour. A shepherd placed fresh cheese beside the porch. No one knew exactly how to apologize. So they brought what little they could. Elara accepted each gift with quiet gratitude. Not because she needed them. Because refusing would only deepen their guilt. Kindness accepted was sometimes as healing as kindness given. As the villagers prepared to leave, a flash of silver near the cabin steps caught Elara's attention. Something lay half buried beneath fresh snow. She knelt. Brushed away the ice. A pendant. It hung from a braided leather cord, its surface carved from bright silver unlike any metal she had ever seen. At its center rested the image of a wolf beneath a rising sun. Around the edge ran delicate symbols too ancient for her to read. She turned it over. On the back. A crown. Not the crown of Everwyn. Different. Older. Its points curved like wolf ears reaching toward the sky. Myra's breath caught. I know that symbol. Elara looked up. You do. The old woman nodded slowly. My grandmother showed me something very similar when I was a child. She carefully touched the edge of the pendant. She said it belonged to the first kings. The kings before Everwyn. No. Myra's voice became little more than a whisper. The wolf kings. Silence settled between them. Several villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Those are only stories. Myra slowly shook her head. Stories always begin somewhere. Inside the cabin. The silver wolf had heard every word. His eyes closed. The pendant. He had not realized it was gone. It had belonged to every Alpha King before him. Not as a symbol of power. As a promise. Each ruler wore it during the ancient Oath of Winter, swearing never to place wolves above humans. Or humans above wolves. Both kingdoms had once shared the same crown. Until betrayal shattered everything. If Elara carried that pendant, the path before her had already begun. Whether she wished it or not. Hundreds of miles away, inside the towering stone walls of Blackthorn Castle, Lord Varric strode through echoing corridors without slowing once. Servants stepped aside. Soldiers lowered their heads. No one dared question the expression carved across his face. He pushed open a pair of enormous oak doors. Beyond them waited a chamber hidden beneath the castle itself. Dust-covered ancient stone walls. Broken statues leaned against cracked pillars. In the center stood a massive table carved from black granite. Spread across it were faded maps far older than the kingdom. One location had been circled countless times. The Valley of Echoes. Varric stared at it in silence. Then he reached beneath the table and withdrew a small iron chest. The lock required 3 different keys. One from his belt. One hidden inside his glove. The last. Worn around his neck beneath his armor. The chest opened with a heavy click. Inside rested a weathered parchment sealed in dark wax. He broke it carefully. The brittle paper crackled beneath his fingers. His eyes moved slowly across the faded writing. Then, his smile returned. So that was the truth. Not simply an alpha wolf. An alpha king. The last living heir to a kingdom erased from history. For years Varric had believed the alpha's blood alone held unimaginable power. Now he understood something far greater. If the rightful alpha king ever reclaimed the ancient throne, every noble family that had risen after the great betrayal, including Varric's own bloodline, would lose its claim to power. Their titles. Their lands. Their wealth. Everything. The kingdom itself had been built upon a lie. He folded the parchment carefully. No. He whispered into the silent chamber. I will not let history correct itself. He turned toward the waiting captain outside the chamber doors. Gather every hunter. My lord. Not half. His grey eyes grew colder than steel. All of them. The captain hesitated. That is nearly 200 men. I know. What are your orders? Lord Varric looked toward the northern mountains visible through the narrow stone window. The setting sun painted the distant peaks crimson. Seal every mountain pass. No one enters. No one leaves. And the girl? Varric's voice became almost emotionless. Bring her to me alive. And the alpha? A long silence followed. Then came the answer that would change the fate of the mountains. Break every chain. Burn every forest if you must. But this time, his scarred face hardened into something almost inhuman. The Wolf King does not escape. Morning arrived beneath a pale sky washed with silver light, but peace did not return to the Frostpine Mountains. The forest knew before the people did. The ravens no longer perched quietly on the high branches. They circled restlessly above the pines, crying into the cold air before disappearing toward the southern valleys. Red squirrels abandoned their hidden nests and darted from tree to tree. Even the wind seemed uneasy, slipping through the forest in long, uneasy sighs. Nature had sensed danger long before human eyes could see it. Elara stood outside her cabin, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of pine needle tea. Fresh snow sparkled beneath the morning sun, hiding every scar left by yesterday's confrontation. For a moment, everything looked peaceful. Too peaceful. She looked toward the tree line. Only 4 wolves remained visible now, each resting among the pines as though they were ordinary creatures enjoying the winter morning. Yet she had begun to understand that nothing about them was ordinary. They were watching, guarding, waiting. Inside the cabin, the silver wolf still rested near the fire. His breathing had become steadier overnight, but every attempt to stand reminded him that his wounded leg had not fully healed. Elara knelt beside him once more. You need another day. She carefully changed the bandage, replacing the herbs that had drawn infection from the wound. The wolf watched her quietly. There was something different in his eyes now. Not merely gratitude. Conflict. Every hour he remained beside her placed a larger target upon her back. His duty demanded that he leave before Lord Varric returned. His heart refused. After years of betrayal, exile, and loneliness, one small cabin had reminded him what kindness felt like. It was a dangerous thing to remember. The sound of hurried footsteps broke the silence. A sharp knock echoed against the cabin door. 3 quick knocks. Then 2 more. Not the pounding of soldiers. The desperate rhythm of someone running out of time. Elara opened the door. Myra stood outside, leaning heavily on her walking staff. Her cheeks were red from the bitter wind, and her breathing came in short, uneven bursts. Behind her stood 2 frightened shepherd boys. The southern road. Myra struggled to catch her breath. They've closed it. Elara frowned. What do you mean? The king's hunters. One of the boys answered instead. There are soldiers everywhere. They're stopping wagons. Searching every traveler. The younger boy swallowed hard. They're asking about you. Elara felt the warmth leave her face. And? The older shepherd looked toward the cabin. They're asking about a silver wolf. Silence settled between them. Inside, the great wolf slowly lifted his head. He had heard every word. Far below the mountains, the roads of Everwyn had changed overnight. Where merchants once laughed beside wagons filled with grain and wool, armed checkpoints now stood across every bridge. Travelers were questioned. Hunters searched carts. Mounted patrols rode through villages from sunrise until darkness. No one understood why. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed an assassin had escaped the capital. Others whispered that war had begun beyond the eastern border. Only Lord Varric's closest officers knew the truth. Every road, every river crossing, every mountain trail had become part of one enormous trap. Back inside the cabin, Myra's weathered eyes settled on the silver pendant resting upon Elara's table. You must leave. Elara looked up. Leave. The mountains won't protect you forever. She lowered her voice. My grandmother once spoke of a place. What place? The Valley of Echoes. The name seemed to stir the room itself. Even the silver wolf's ears lifted. Myra continued. She said it lies beyond the northern cliffs, hidden where the oldest stones still remember the First Kingdom. I thought it was only a story. So did I. The old woman smiled sadly. But stories have a strange habit of becoming real. She pointed toward the pendant. If that belongs where I think it does. Her gaze shifted toward the wolf. Then someone there has been waiting for its return. Elara looked down at the ancient symbol resting in her palm. It suddenly felt heavier than silver should. What if you're wrong? Myra answered gently. What if I'm not? Outside, one of the grey wolves suddenly stood. Its ears turned toward the western ridge. A low warning growl escaped its throat. Another wolf answered farther away. Then another. The sound spread through the forest in quiet waves. Not panic. Communication. The silver wolf was already on his feet before Elara reached the window. Across the distant hillside, tiny dark figures moved between the trees. At first they looked like shadows. Then sunlight caught polished helmets. Hunters. Far more than before. Rows upon rows of them. Their crimson banners appeared one after another through the pines. The mountain itself seemed to bleed red. They found us. Elara barely recognized her own voice. The silver wolf limped toward the door. He intended to leave. To draw them away. If Lord Varric followed him into the forest, perhaps Elara could escape unnoticed. He lowered his head briefly toward her. A silent farewell. Elara understood immediately. No. She stepped in front of the door. You can't even run. His golden eyes pleaded with her. Go. She shook her head. I won't let you face them alone. The wolf looked at her for a long moment. Then something extraordinary happened. Very slowly. He lifted his forehead until it rested gently against hers. No fear. No hesitation. Just quiet trust. For one heartbeat, the world beyond the cabin disappeared. The fire crackled softly behind them. Snow drifted lazily outside the window. Neither human nor wolf moved. An unspoken promise passed between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. A horn echoed through the valley. Then another. The wolves outside answered with long, haunting howls that rolled across the Frostpine Mountains like voices carried by the wind. The sound was neither rage nor despair. It was a summons. From every direction, wolves emerged from the forest. Grey, black, white. Old guardians scarred by countless winters. Young hunters swift as the wind. They flowed between the trees in silent determination until they surrounded the cabin once again. But this time, they were not waiting. They were preparing. The largest black wolf stepped forward and bowed deeply before the silver wolf. Then it turned toward the northern forest. Waiting. Showing the way. The silver wolf looked toward Elara. Then toward the trail. She understood. The Valley of Echoes. It was their only chance. Myra quickly pressed a leather satchel into Elara's hands. Inside were dried herbs, bread, a small waterskin, and a wool blanket. I wish I could go with you. Elara embraced the old woman tightly. Thank you. Myra's eyes glistened. Whatever happens. She placed one wrinkled hand over Elara's heart. Don't lose the kindness that brought all of this to your door. The first arrows landed only moments later. One struck the cabin roof. Another buried itself in the snow beside the herb garden. The hunters had arrived. Without another second to spare, the wolves surged into motion. Half the pack charged west, deliberately drawing soldiers away with thunderous speed. The remaining wolves formed a living shield around Elara and the silver wolf as they slipped into a narrow trail hidden between towering pines. Behind them, shouting filled the valley. Horses screamed. Hunting horns blared. Lord Varric rode into the clearing just in time to see the silver wolf disappear into the northern wilderness beside the woman he had sworn to capture. His jaw tightened. They're heading north. One captain looked confused. Into the high pass. No. Varric stared toward the distant snow-covered peaks. His expression slowly darkened. The Valley of Echoes. The words tasted like poison. He had hoped they would never discover it. Now there could be no doubt. The final battle for the Forgotten Kingdom had begun. Far ahead, beneath endless pines shimmering with fresh snow, Elara followed the wolves deeper into lands no map of Everwyn dared to name. She did not know whether she was walking toward hope or destiny itself.